Welcome everybody to our live stream on the sign of Aries. It's the first sign of the zodiac. Aries springs into being with the spring equinox. So if you're born between roughly March 21st and April 20th, then you're Aries. However, everybody has Aries in our zodiac chart, in our natal chart. That's the horoscope that shows what was happening in the zodiac and with the planets in the sky, the moment and place where we were born. Now, why is this important? This is our unique kind of soul map is one of the ways that we describe it. So we came into the world at a specific time in a specific place, and that was the constellation in the sky at that particular moment, at that particular place. So that was kind of our first moment, the first thing that we experienced. So we took that on as a kind of karmic stamp. Now this has to do with Aries, because Aries is related to the first house. Just like there's 12 signs in the zodiac, there are 12 houses. And the 12 houses pertain to different areas of our life. So the 7th house pertains to relationships, the 10th house pertains to career, the 4th house pertains to what our home life was like or who we are when we're at home alone. Now with Aries is about the first house. And the first house begins with the ascendant. The ascendant, also known as our rising sign, is the zodiac sign that was rising in the sky the moment we were born. So I'm pointing like this. If this is east, this is the rising sign. It's what was coming up on the horizon. And then, so the ascendant is the beginning of the first house, and that relates to Aries. Now, think of yourself as coming out of your mother's womb. So you're in this oceanic state, right, of connection with your mother, and generally very blissful for most of us. And then all of a sudden there's all this tumult and life-threatening situations. That's kind of an Aries theme, right? Aries is also related to Mars, the god of war. So tumult, feeling like we might be torn apart or destroyed. And then we spring out into the world. And if we came out looking, what we would have first seen would have been the rising sign. And that puts this karmic stamp on us. And we think, oh, this is what the world is like, whatever our rising sign is. And what we think the world is like is generally what we end up creating for ourselves. So that's what the first house is about. How we experience the world and how we interpret the world, the choices that we make to create the world that we're expecting, basically. So one of the cool things about, one of the many, 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 many cool things about astrology, and AstroDharma is even way, way cooler, is that we can explore our natal chart, kind of the cards that we were dealt when we were born, and then we explore all the choices that we have, and we have a lot of different choices. So with Aries, we look at, using Aries as an example, we do this with every sign and every house. We look, what do we have in Aries? What planets do we have in Aries? What house is in Aries? And then what do we have in our first house? What's happening there? And then where is Mars located? And by finding out those things, we can start to understand, how we show up in the world. Aries is about beginnings. Aries is about starting things. Remember, the zodiac starts with Aries. So whatever we have in Aries talks about how we start things. And Aries is really about starting. So if you want to start something, then you want to see what you have in Aries, what you have in the first house, and what you have in Mars, because those will be the kind of natural tools that we have at our disposal to help us start things well. Now, the obvious downside of this is that if you're good at starting things, and I say this from experience, you're usually not that good at maintaining them or at finishing them at closure. So if you're strong in Aries or you have a prominent Mars, Mars is the what's called the ruler of Aries, the planet that goes together with Aries. Or if you have a prominent first house, that's something that you're going to need to work with, is learning about how to get better at maintaining or sustaining things over time and get better at closure. Or to at least have the wisdom to surround yourself with people who are good at those things so that can be supported in you. Because people with strong Aries tend to go to the next thing, go to the next thing, go to the next thing, go to the next thing. Sound familiar? You may have a prominent Aries, Mars, or first house. This is a live stream. We are so open to questions. And going forward, we'll be doing every sign every month. And we encourage you to submit your questions in advance if you like, or join us live. And you can ask questions live. Yes, Ava.
I have a question. Just you were saying about if you have a strong Aries, to surround yourselves with people that have are stronger at closure.
Yes.
Which signs would be that? So if you have a strong Aries, what would be good signs that would complement?
Oh, that's a good question. And let me just say, it's not that cut and dry. So Taurus is really good at maintaining or sustaining, but we can't just go grab a Taurus and kind of be like, here, help me with this, for two reasons. One, just because we have something in that sign or it's our sun sign, there's a lot of other things going on. So just because someone's a Taurus doesn't necessarily mean they're great at sustaining or maintaining. They will have that ability, but it might be affected by other things going on in their chart. And secondly, we can't be good at everything, and we want to find people who support us where we're not that strong. But it's really important that we do not try and outsource things, because that's generally what we do when we're less aware, when we're not aware of what our shortcomings are, is we get someone who's strong at that and get kind of unconsciously get them to do it. And donuts to dollars, that will come back and bite us on the bum at some point. Because really what the whole spiritual path is about integration and awareness. And we may make choices, oh, they're much better at this than I am, and they're willing to do it, so yes, they'll do it this time. But that's different than like, oh great, I don't have to deal with that, and kind of pretending we don't see it. Okay, does that answer your question? And you have a prominent Aries, don't you? Ava, I'm here, my awesome team, Ava and Cara, both have prominent Aries. Yeah, woo, we're Aries lovers. So I'm a Capricorn, and that means that, so my sun is in Capricorn, and that makes my sun ruler is Saturn. Saturn rules Capricorn. So the planet ruling my sun is Saturn. And I have Saturn in Aries. So that makes Aries an important sign for me. And I am very good at starting things. And it's been a lifelong journey to learn how to maintain them, how to even value maintaining them, how to value maintaining things, and to really value closure. Because I used to, when I was less conscious, I was like, oh, somebody else will deal with that, or who wants to deal with closure? Closure's boring. And so that gives you a feeling of how things show up in our life when we're less conscious, and then how we lean into them to make them more aware and appreciate the value of all the different qualities. Did you have a question, Cara? You looked... No? Okay. Yes, Ava has another question.
My question is, I was recently, Cara and I were going through the Sangha natal charts, and we noticed that quite a few people in the Sangha have Mars in the 7th house.
Oh, really?
And I was wondering if that's something that is common among, well, it's two questions. Is that common amongst spiritual explorers? And then how can we, if someone has Mars in the 7th, how can you kind of draw out their Mars energy? And so you're talking about like how sometimes it can be imbalanced if you rely on someone else too.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so we mentioned earlier the 7th house. So some schools of thought say that there are 12 signs, 12 zodiac signs, and you'll be familiar with those in order. It's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Now, another school of thought says that there are actually 6 pairs of signs, because if you take a sign and the opposite sign across the zodiac circle, they're pretty much opposites. So, and I'm going to get to Aries' question about Mars in the 7th, and I'm on the way to get there. So the opposite of Aries is about going for it. Aries is about innovation. Aries is about breakthrough. Aries is about meeting goals. Aries is about having energy and just totally going for it. And if you kind of say like, well, how does this affect everybody else? And Aries will just be like, what do you mean? Right? Like, what other people? What does it matter? So now its opposite is Libra. And Libra is all about other. The scales, it's like self and other. It's all about relationships. And Libra is associated with the 7th house. So the question that Ava's just posed is about what if you have Mars in the 7th house? And a lot of people in our spiritual community apparently have Mars in the 7th house. That's interesting. So Mars in the 7th house is kind of, it's opposite in opposite. And that's challenging. There's no question about it. How do you get Mars, which is about going for it? Mars is the god of war in Greek mythology, Roman mythology. So Mars is not afraid to argue, to confront, and all of these things are anathema to Libra, which is about harmony and how's the other person feeling and are we all okay? And so if you've got Mars in Libra, there's this dilemma. And we all have these in our charts. We all have these seemingly irreconcilable differences within ourselves that nonetheless we've been handed to reconcile. And so that's a lifelong journey. How can I get comfortable with being aggressive in a healthy way while still keeping other people's feelings into account, taking those into account, and maintaining healthy relationships? So that's interesting that so many people in our spiritual community have that. I think that's, so the less conscious side of that, the kind of shadow of that, is probably 7th house is, so the ascendant, which is related to Aries, is the sign on the horizon in the east, rising when we are born. Now the opposite of that is called the descendant, and it's the sign that was behind us when we were born. And that's what the 7th house is like. It's like that spot on your back that you just can't see in the mirror, no matter, you kind of turn this way, and you just can't see that spot. That's the 7th house. And that's the house of one-on-one relationships. And normally what we do with that house is we find somebody to fulfill those functions, those energies in our life. So someone who has Mars in the 7th is probably earlier in their life or before they're beginning their spiritual practice. They're probably not going to be that in touch with their aggression. And aggression's not necessarily a bad thing. We need aggression. We need an energy to get shit done, for example, right? So because it's the house of one-on-one relationships, the 7th, what we'll probably do is get together with somebody who's really good at that, who's really good at aggressing, who maybe gets into fights, and then we'll be the sort of like, we'll be the harmonious one because we're outsourcing that more aggressive energy. And then as our spiritual practice develops, we in our tradition, we work a lot with the shadow. So we start to realize that how come it's always my partner who's getting into arguments and I never do? And of course, in the beginning, we're like, I'm just that way. I'm just more peaceful, and they just happen to be more aggressive. And then as time goes by, we realize, I'm kind of getting them to do that for me. And we sort of take that back. We learn to develop those skills. We learn to stand into constructive conflict, for example. And then we get the upside, we get all that energy back. So that's an example of Mars, which rules Aries, what it looks like in the 7th house. Yes, Car?
So we have a question from Martin Blackwell.
Hello, Martin.
He says, thanks for the opportunity to ask. He says, are planets located in the 1st house, which as I understand parallels Aries, are they particularly accented in a chart? And then he says for him, he has Jupiter in the 1st house, but virtually with no aspects to other planets. so he's
Oh,
concerned about that. Anyway, so we're wondering about, yeah, exactly, the first house planets.
planets in the first. That's a great question, Martin. So we talked earlier about how the ascendant is what was happening in the cosmos as we were coming out of our mother's womb. And then any planets in the first are similar in flavor in that they just, whatever's in the first is kind of like the universe is just like that, or we're just like that. The thing about the first is anything that's happening in the first house is really, really integral to our idea about who we are and our idea about how the world is. And it's so integral to our worldview and our self-view, our identity, that we may have a hard time separating them. We may have a hard time even kind of saying like, oh, I tend to see the world as this way. We might think like, no, it just is that way. And Martin, I know, has had many, many years of spiritual practice, including a long time study of astrology. So I doubt this is much of an issue for you at this point, but you may relate to that from your younger days when it can be quite shocking to meet someone who has a very different worldview, who is convinced that the world is just like that. So I hope that sheds a bit of light on that. Yes.
Okay, we have another question from Dave.
Hello,
Asteroid.
Dave.
And he asked, how does Mars energy manifest when it's retrograde? In my case, in Aries in the 7th, but also in general.
Mars in Aries in the 7th. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think what we do, I have found that if I stick, astrology, like any esoteric study, goes on forever, as does Buddha Dharma. And it can be so fascinating. There's so many different branches that we can go into. And I find that if I just stick with what's called mundane astrology, there's esoteric astrology, a whole different subject. If I just stick with the zodiac, the ruling planets, which these I'm holding out like transparency layers. So we've got one transparency layer, that's the zodiac wheel. We've got another transparency, that's the planets. And we've got another transparency, that's the houses. And then they all mix up. And I find that I have more than enough to work with just those basics. And once we get really, really well versed in those basics, then is a good time to start branching out into other things like retrograde and so on. I think there's a temptation to get into all the amazing details in the beginning, and then we can kind of miss some of the fundamental building blocks of our chart, and to our detriment. So I didn't know that you had Mars in Aries. That is really Maha, aggressive, assertive, strong energy. And how interesting that you have it in the 7th house, which is the house of other, which is what we were just talking about, what we tend to project onto our significant others. So I think in your question, that's a much more relevant point. Where is that? Mars in Aries is kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of macho. You know, Mars in Aries is sort of, yeah, macho, aggressive, both for better and for worse. And that, I think, would be a super interesting area to explore. And where is that energy? Where does that tend to show up in your life? And my guess would be in the partners that you choose might be super feisty people. And so it's about, for all of us, it's about bringing that energy back here. Yes, ma'am.
We have about 7 minutes to go.
Okay.
I have a question since nobody else is. I'd like to jump in.
Please jump in.
On that note, I have Mars and Venus in Aries in the 11th.
Oh.
So I was wondering if you had any comments does my Aries show up in groups, or do I project onto groups, or something around?
Are you asking me, or are you telling me?
I'm asking. That's my theory from what you're saying, but I'd like to hear what you think.
Well, what's your own experience been? You also have Mars and Aries. Isn't that fascinating that both you and Dave have that?
Yeah.
We live together in community. We live and work and practice together in community.
Yeah, Mars. I feel I have a lot more energy when there's other people around, and I feel somewhat depressed if I'm just working on my own.
Oh, interesting.
But if others are around, then I can get up to meditate, or I can go to work easily. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I notice mostly, and I like to kind of be bossy. I think in groups, take the lead. Yeah, that's what I can see.
Okay.
You have other comments.
Okay, that's great, Kara. So Kara shared with us that she has Mars conjunct, that's together right next to Venus in Aries. They're not together. Oh, I'm sorry. They're far apart. Okay. She has both Mars and Aries Mars and Venus in Aries. Venus is about how we relate to other people. And it's the anima, the feminine principle. Mars is the animus, the masculine principle. So she's got both of those in Aries, fiery. So both her animus and her inner male and female are both going to be fiery. And it's in the 11th house. The 11th house is the house of groups and also hopes and dreams and aspirations. So we can see that connected, like what we hope for in the world, what we hope for with our life, then we'll gravitate towards like-minded groups of people or organizations. So if I have hopes and dreams for a healthy planet, so I'm in a group of spiritual seekers, and I'm also involved a lot with social justice and environmental justice organizations. So that's how groups and hopes and dreams connect. So, I think you're spot on, Kara. I think you have a lot of energy in group, and that's really great to experience that, being one of the people in that group. And so your Venus is in groups too, so here you are living in community, and I think you have quite a assertive presentation, like you're not afraid to share your opinion, and you can really go for it in groups. And as you mentioned, you can show up kind of bossy sometimes, which is also has a great side. We need leadership, we need direction. So bossiness on a good day is leadership and direction, right? So I think you're spot on with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question from Leslie Lowe.
Hey, Leslie.
She says, I have Mars in Sagittarius, and I want to run away when I get angry. I'm trying to resolve that. Any suggestions?
Oh, yeah, that's a great association. Well, Sagittarius is really about exploration and going to see what's over the next hill. So Sagittarius is the great explorer, the great traveler. And so it makes sense that you want to maybe not run away, but run towards something else when you experience conflict. So I think that's a great insight. And I think so what we do is we figure out what are the natural qualities of these signs. So for Sag, I just did that. So Sag is not necessarily running away, it's running towards something else. So I think a great way to work with that is just to decide what that something else could be that would be helpful. So if I understood correctly, I might not have, but if it's running away from conflict, which is Mars gets into conflict, it's the god of war. And that's not necessarily bad, right? It also means kind of standing up for your values. Values are more Venus, but you need Mars to do the standing up. So if there's conflict, Mars, and you feel like running, think about what you want to run towards. So Sagittarius is about exploration, higher learning, world views. So maybe you want to run towards something, some kind of learning, like learning about conflict resolution, right? Or learning about nonviolent communication, or learning about how different types of people work with conflict. So those would be some options.
Great.
Okay.
We're basically at the end, if you want to, anything else you'd like to share?
Okay, well, I think the most important thing to share here is with the first house, with Aries. So Aries is how we move forward to meet the world. And Mars is having the energy to do that. And then the first house is how we believe the world to be, and therefore the choices that we make to create that world. And so I think the important thing here is that we have choices. We have choices about how we meet things. We have choices about how we experience the world and how we interpret the world. And we have choices about how we use our energy to do that. And so AstroDharma is really about exploring those choices so that we can make the best choices available to us at the time for the benefit of all beings. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. Next will be Taurus, Venus, and the second house. We look forward to seeing you there. And to learn more, please see Innerplicity, INNERPLICITY.com, innerplicity.com, to enjoy or learn more about our absolutely innovative, wonderful, energetic Introduction to AstroDharma online course. Have a beautiful day.
Yeehaw!